I really wanted to like this movie. After reviewing Cats, I kind of wanted to do something more positive, so I decided to watch a lesser-known Spielberg movie, and this one, well, I can give it this much. At least it's better than Cats. 1941. Now, 1941 came out in 1979. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, written by the Bobs from Back to the Future, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, those guys, and is what I consider Steven Spielberg's third movie, which isn't exactly accurate. He directed some things before Jaws, but for me personally, I consider Spielberg's career fully established at Jaws. That's what made him a household name. So Jaws is what I consider his first movie, and after that he made Close Encounters, and now we're at 1941. And 1941 is a comedy, except it's not all that funny. That was really the biggest disappointment for me in this movie. 1941 is not particularly funny. It didn't really give me a lot of moments where I laughed, and for a comedy, that's kind of a problem. That's your one job, but there are other things in 1941 that I would say qualify it as almost like a cult classic, or things that you can find enjoyment in it just as a movie and as a spectacle. But as a comedy, I don't know, it is kind of lacking some of the funny. And it's really weird that this was directed by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, because after this they made Romancing the Stone, Back to the Future, both of which are hilarious and great movies that still hold up pretty well today and consistently make me laugh. So they are capable of being funny. So I don't know if it's their fault that the script isn't all that funny, or if Spielberg just hadn't really figured out how to direct comedic timing very well and comedic antics very well and good character moments, so that kind of falls flat. But regardless, this movie is not a very effective comedy. But what is it? Well, it's the story of December 1941. And if you know anything about American history, that's when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and got America into the war. Now, this is a bit later in December. This is closer to Christmas time, and we are in the war, and everybody's got this super paranoid attitude about the Japanese invading California. You have a bunch of enlisted men here to protect the home front. You got a bunch of civilians that are scared about a Japanese attack. And on paper, that's a pretty fun concept for a comedy. You can really play up those fears in a satirical kind of way, kind of like Dr. Strangelove. And watching this movie, I can definitely see parallels between this movie and Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. And I know that Spielberg has actually gone on record in saying that that was a huge influence on what he wanted to do with 1941. All the pieces are there. I do have to say there's two things that are holding this movie back from being a Dr. Strangelove type movie. One is actually the only time I can think of where this is a negative: John Williams' score. John Williams did the music for this movie, and normally he's fantastic. He's able to match the tone of the movie really well, but for some reason here, it just doesn't match. It's a bit too whimsical, aspirational, patriotic. It has an old-fashioned 1941 feel to it for sure. But there's something about it that just feels a little too confident, for lack of a better word, and it's that confidence that does feel at home with the score to Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's really where this kind of music belongs, and I feel like you should have gone with something less earnest and a little more tongue-in-cheek, a little more silly going on with the score for this movie, which isn't exactly in John Williams' comfort zone either. He tends to lean more into the drama and suspense and character emotions in the films that he scores for it. So I can't help but feel like maybe that was a miscalculation, having John Williams score this movie. Even though he's fantastic, and I love a lot of the scores that he's done, this movie just didn't feel quite right. And the other thing holding this movie back is that it's way too all over the place as far as characters. There are so many characters that this movie throws at you, and if you look at the marketing, you have John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd right there on the poster, and you think that, oh, they're going to be the main characters. Well, the two of them don't really interact much, if at all, during the movie. They are part of completely different subplots, and either one is really who I call the main character. The main character, if there is one, because again, there's just so many different subplots and storylines converging in this movie. I have to say it's this kid, I think his name is Wally. He's a busboy. He's a young kid that really just wants to go to this dance. He's learning how to dance. There's a party going on later in the movie at this nightclub. He spends a lot of this movie really trying to impress his girl so they can go to the dance together, but there's a feud breaking out between the civilians and the enlisted men, and the dance becoming a USO event, so only enlisted men and their female dates are allowed to attend, which means Wally is not able to go. And so your typical comedic shenanigans ensue with that plot, which seems like it has the start to a good idea if I cared about Wally and his girlfriend and their plight and their romance. But because this movie is juggling so many different things, I couldn't really get invested in the subplot, mainly because the actors aren't that memorable. They kind of blend in with the other characters in this movie, which is weird considering Dan Aykroyd in this movie. He's leading this group in defending California against this Japanese sub that's trying to blow up Hollywood because that's an American symbol and it's gonna demoralize the Americans if the Japanese blow up Hollywood, which is the start of a fun idea. But Dan Aykroyd doesn't get nearly enough screen time. He's kind of a minor character in this movie, so the scenes with him don't last that long. And while they are kind of funny in a vacuum, and he did make me chuckle a few times, it doesn't really add to a whole lot, especially because he spends the entire climax unconscious, so Wally can drive the tank and have the heroic moment in the end. Then you have John Belushi as this drunk, PTSD-ridden slob of a fighter pilot that doesn't really know where he's going. He's kind of lost throughout the whole movie. It's just him and his plane. He'll stop down, refuel, do a couple different things, go somewhere, make a couple jokes, and he'll be back up in his plane. And his story culminates in when he thinks he's shooting down a Japanese Zero, but it's actually one of the American planes, and that's that. Again, really doesn't go anywhere. There aren't really a lot of consequences to these actions, except for Ned Beatty, who plays the father of the girl that's going with Wally to the dance, that whole subplot. Ned Beatty actually does make me laugh a few times here, mainly because his whole world is becoming undone because of the war and because of the idea that the Japanese are going to be right on his doorstep. And he's got beachfront property. And he's got this big house that's being used by the military as a place to store this giant gun as a defense turret against the sub. There are some funny things that come about that, but I will say there are two scenes in this movie that I think really do work. And if the rest of the movie was like these two scenes, I think we would have a comedic classic on our hands. The first scene happens right at the beginning of this movie. It's the first scene of the movie, and it's when Spielberg decides to parody himself. He actually recreates the opening to Jaws, where you see this girl, she's going into the water, she's skinny dipping, she's swimming around, and all of a sudden she feels something and the music kicks on. And again, because you got John Williams, this is the one time I think John Williams' score actually works really well here for comedic effect. He plays the Jaws theme, his own theme in this movie. So you really get a sense that, oh, this is Jaws. You have Spielberg spoofing himself, you have John Williams spoofing himself. This is a great setup. And the payoff is actually really funny too, because she feels something move, but it's not a shark, it's a submarine. You see the periscope come up and she grabs on, she gets taken up out of the water. She's just stranded up there. The whole submarine surfaces. Japanese soldiers are coming out to look at what's going on. They look up and they see this swimmer. And it's just a classic screwball comedy moment. Reactions are priceless. Some of the lines are pretty funny. And I think that that setup and payoff actually worked. It was a great way of Spielberg to reference his past work, the work that made him a household name to begin with, but bring it into 1941. It actually reminded me of something that you'd see out of Airplane or Hot Shot. It's that kind of surreal referential humor that movies like epic movie and superhero movie and disaster movie have kind of ruined for a lot of audiences, because those movies were just, oh, we're gonna reference something just to reference it. But here it's an actual joke. There's setup and payoff and it's funny. The other scene that really works, and I think is the highlight of the movie for me, is when Slim Pickens comes on the scene. And I love this guy. He's a great character actor. He's arguably the funniest character in Blazing Saddles. He gets all the best lines. He could take a line that isn't that funny on paper, and just the way he delivers it with this thick accent and the earnest way he talks, he could still make it funny, even if it's not written very well. And the first time you see him here, he's driving a truck, and his name is Hollis Wood, and he collects Christmas trees. He chops them down, throws them in his truck, and you have all these Japanese soldiers that came onto shore, and they're disguised as trees. They're trying to be sneaky, and he tries to chop one down, and it jumps over, and it's this funny little routine with the Christmas trees, and then he gets captured and taken onto the sub. And that was supposed to be it for him. But then they expanded his part because, well, they got Slim Pickens. He said yes, so they figured they better use him for more than just one scene, otherwise he'd be completely wasted here. Which is true, because when we see him on the sub and he's being interrogated by the Japanese, and the one Nazi soldier played by Christopher Lee, of all people, who completely owns it in this role like he does every role. His deadpan stoic delivery is just priceless here in the face of all this absurdity. So they're interrogating him, going through his pockets in a true Doctor Strangelove move, which that's a scene they just ripped right from that movie, and Spielberg has admitted as such. That was the big reference, and it's just as funny here like it was there. And as they open up this box of Cracker Jacks that he had, they found the prize inside, which is a little compass, which just so happens to be the thing that they need to navigate their way to Hollywood, to know where they're going. So Slim Pickens grabs it and swallows it. After realizing that, oh, he's inadvertently helping the Japanese, he swallows the thing and is like, all right, now you can never get it. And then the soldiers proceed to force feed him prune juice and have him sit on the toilet with armed guard pointing bayoneted rifles at him until it comes out and they can collect their compass. And I don't know what it is about the scene. Maybe it's Slim Pickens' delivery. Maybe it's the fact that you have Christopher Lee as a Nazi with all these other Japanese soldiers acting so serious and no nonsense in a scene that's literally toilet humor, the lowest form of comedy there is. But for whatever reason, it did make me laugh, and I think it's the funniest part of this movie. And after that scene and his subsequent escape, really don't see him again, and that made me so sad, because here was the one routine, the one bit that worked so well. It went on for so long, and there were multiple jokes in between. They mixed up the humor a little bit, and it was just consistently funny every time they cut back to these guys. And now it's over, and the rest of the movie just isn't that funny. Even the bad guys kind of stopped being funny after Slim Pickens left. And I think a big problem with that is that they don't speak English. The Japanese soldiers speak Japanese, and the Nazis speak German, and it's subtitled, but I feel like there was a real comedic missed opportunity here, because the lines as you read them are like, okay, that's a funny line, but it doesn't really make you laugh the way it should because you're reading it, and you can't really get the inflection and the tone of voice when you're reading something. Even though you're hearing it in a different language, it still doesn't connect as much as if you had heard it in English. And they could have just as easily done this in English, but with thick Japanese and German accents. I think that would have made it even funnier. I don't think anybody would have questioned the historical accuracy of this movie with these guys speaking English, even though they're Japanese and German. Because after all, it is a comedy, and there's a higher level of suspension of disbelief here. So I think if they had spoken English, they could have really made this material funnier in the delivery of some of these lines. Because as is, it's just kind of forgettable. And after a while, it just feels like work. You're just constantly reading these jokes, and you're not laughing because you need to read the next line so you don't miss anything. And there's enough reading in this movie to begin with. This movie opens up with paragraphs of text explaining the early days of World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and some of that I think was necessary to set the stage. The sheer quantity of it is ridiculous. It almost feels like the opening text of a Star Wars movie. Now that I'm saying it out loud, if they had done the text like a Star Wars movie and had this big fanfare and made it over the top like a 1940s newsreel or a straight up reference to Star Wars, that would have been funny. You would have put a joke in there. But here it's just a black screen, white text. You're just reading for what seems like a solid minute and a half of runtime before anything remotely funny happens. So yeah, comedically, tonally, this movie's kind of a mess. It kind of wants to be Indiana Jones, but kind of wants to be Doctor Strangelove, but also wants to be like a Mel Brooks comedy, or It's a Mad World. I actually don't remember how many mads are in that title. But there's also some influence from stuff like Grease and American Graffiti with the teenage stuff going on. So I just think it tried to do too much. There's too many things in the pot. Maybe Spielberg's rationale for that was, oh, all these things are just going to build and become cacophonous and become funnier as they escalate and as the riots break out and as the shooting breaks out, and all these things will come to a head towards the end of the movie, and we'll have these big stunts and people are just going to laugh rolling in the aisles, but it just doesn't happen. It didn't happen back then in the early screenings of this movie in 1979, and it sure as heck doesn't happen now, because it just feels loud and crowded and obnoxious, and it doesn't build to anything funny. There's not a lot of really funny jokes being told. However, to end this movie more on a positive note, Spielberg's directing and camera work here is classic Spielberg. It's good. It's technically very well made, and there's some really interesting shots and camera moves, and especially this long take that happens during this extended dance sequence does remind me of his later work in West Side Story, and I wouldn't be surprised if while he was making that movie he was remembering some of the tricks that he started doing back in 1941. And the other aspect of this movie that does actually work are the stunts, the practical effects, these big set pieces. There's a lot of action in this movie, more than I expected going in. There's a scene where the big Ferris wheel rolling over a pier. That's actually pretty exciting. It keeps your attention really well. It's an impressive stunt. It looks great. Like I alluded to before, there's a sequence where John Belushi's character shoots down a plane that's actually an American plane, but he thinks it's a Japanese plane. That sequence is actually pretty fun and exciting and creative and fairly well executed. Even though it's not particularly funny, it is entertaining. And the big showstopper stunt at the end of the movie is when Ned Beatty's house just falls over the cliff and just shatters. That looks great, it looks expensive, and this movie clearly had a budget. There was a lot that went into making this movie, a lot of extras, a lot of props, a lot of special effects. I think it was, at the time, the biggest budget that Spielberg had to work with in any of his movies. This was a co-production between Universal and Columbia Pictures, so they both funded this movie, so it was double the money that he was used to working with. So he took that money and he said, okay, I'm gonna do some really impressive things. And when you look at it, it looks impressive. I think the visuals more than anything else really sell this movie to me and do make me want to revisit this one from time to time. I'd never seen it before I watched it for this video because it had such a bad reputation, but after seeing it, sure, the story's a mess and the jokes don't always land, but there were a couple funny scenes and a couple interesting ideas in there, and the visual style is classic Steven Spielberg, and his style is something that always captures my attention and my interest as a fan and someone who really appreciates the craft that goes into Spielberg's process of choosing shots and camera movements and different lighting setups. I just eat that stuff up. So at the end of the day, is 1941 a great movie? No, not really. Is it a horrible movie? Is it a black spot in Spielberg's reputation? No, I don't even think it's the worst movie he's ever made. I do think it was a creative misstep, not just for him, but for the Bobs that helped write this movie. And I feel like behind the scenes, while they had the best of intentions and they have a lot of clearly talented people, their efforts just didn't combine in a way that really worked and will work later with something like Back to the Future. Because Spielberg was also involved in that production, and that movie is leagues better and leagues funnier. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about 1941? Have you seen it? It's kind of a lesser known Spielberg movie, so I don't really know how many of you guys are even familiar with this one, but whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.